Hello everyone, welcome back to a BrainScratch Searchlight update. Don't worry, you will also get a new episode of BrainScratch today, but there's some new information on a case that we've covered recently that I wanted to go over. Thank you so much to the viewers that have been talking about this, commenting about this update, and tweeting me about it. I truly appreciate it. This is about the Deorr Kunz case that we covered very recently, and Klein Investigations, if you don't recall, they're the investigators that were initially working with the family, then were fired by the family, but have since continued the investigation on their own accord. We'll talk about that a little bit as we get into the letter. They've released a multiple-page report about findings on this case. So I think it's very important that we spend a little time, go through those findings. And of course here we have a very cute picture of the boy in question, Deorr Kunz. And what happened to Deorr? Maybe this information can give us a bit more insight. Let's take a look. This is being hosted on eastidahonews.com, but you can also go to the Klein Investigation Agency Facebook page. They have scans of the report posted there. Let's take a look. So I have to say the first thing I find interesting is typically when I look into cases where there's a private investigator involved, there's a little bit of a strange sense of ego that seems to come into play with private investigators. And quite frequently, there's a gap between the private investigators and the local law enforcement. The private investigators usually are pretty critical of the job that local law enforcement is doing. And I'm seeing some trends here that don't quite line up with that. But in terms of the ego thing, we hit it very early in this report. KIC Texas was brought into the case after turning it down 2 times in the late summer and fall of 2015. The family had no money to hire an investigator, and through family and friends applied for funding from KIC Texas. So of course he has to mention right off the top that he turned it down twice. I don't know why that is necessarily important, considering that when he did eventually take it on, he's saying that he's not going to charge them at least the hourly rate for the investigators. He's going to keep it to expenses only. But I get these very weird sensations when I review information like this. I don't think people realize sometimes how they put their character out there. And Philip Klein, now that I've watched a bunch of footage of him being interviewed, I'm getting a bit of a weird vibe off this guy, that maybe he's a little bit more of a media hound than I would like for doing something like this. Admittedly, if he's helping investigations, I have nothing wrong with that, but I have some questions about how this information's laid out. But let's continue here. So it goes on to say that they did take the case. They did a fundraiser with the general public. They raised $29,201. And they're saying that $20,000 was used for investigators and equipment, travel, and hotels only. Once again, kind of contradicts information I heard before. I thought they weren't going to charge for investigators, but I don't know. The main thing they're trying to point out here is there is a discrepancy of over $9,000, and he very much plainly states, we have no idea what happened to the $9,201 other money given. Now, with the research I've done into cases like this, when a family member goes missing, the family gets put on pause. For some people, that means they don't get to continue their jobs. Their income can be affected very quickly and very drastically. And there are other signs, even in this own document, that point to the fact that perhaps Deorr's parents were having financial trouble, maybe even before this, but certainly after this. So the fact that $9,000 disappears, if the family was using that to cover their own rent at home while they weren't working because they were out searching, is that really a misappropriation of funds? Personally, I don't think so. And you guys know, in the case of Bianca Carrasco, we actually donated money to her sister that's taking care of the kids for this specific reason. It costs to live life, and if you're not able to work, or you have a person that was making money that is now gone, the slack has to get picked up somewhere. So honestly, this discrepancy I find a little petty, and considering how important some of the other information is in this report, I'm not really sure why they had to point that out, outside of trying to slam the character of the parents. which he already openly does in terms of media. And if he wants to mention that they failed their lie detector tests again, I think that's a better way to slam their character in a way that is pertinent to the actual case, instead of, now you're trying to say that they're embezzling funds or something. I don't know. I found this interesting just in how it was worded. Deorr Kunz was a 3-year-old male allegedly fathered by Vernal Deorr Kunz and mothered Jessica Mitchell Anderson. And I just find it curious because that's one of the points that I thought about and mentioned in the video I made. What if Deorr Jr. is not really the son of Vernal? Could that be a motive of some kind for something to happen to that young man, for him to disappear in some way? So it seems like the investigators are also leaving room for that possibility in the way that they worded this. They talk about, of course, where the disappearance occurred and that massive searches were undertaken within 5 square miles, which is actually a bit bigger than the information that I had heard about. They then list all of the public and private agencies that are currently investigating this incident. Well, they say currently investigating here, but then they show M. Frank Viltz, the private investigator, and that he's resigned from the case. So he's not actually currently investigating it. But other than that, you can see you've got the Department of Justice, the FBI, you've got the 2 sheriff's departments that were working together in that area. And then it goes to say that they've basically set up some type of shared drive area where they're able to share information with these agencies and that they communicate with them on a regular basis. It's just another weird point for me. Typically, when I see private investigators get hired, the collaboration between them and the law enforcement is not as much as I'm seeing here. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Considering the case isn't solved yet, I don't see a particular benefit to it. I think that a private investigator is typically hired by a family to bring a different perspective and some fresh eyes to the case. And if you have them speaking directly to law enforcement, it's possible, I'm not saying this always happens, but it's possible that they are being biased by the information that the law enforcement has dug up or by the opinions of law enforcement on the facts or evidence that they've uncovered. So I don't know that it's the best thing for this investigation agency to be working so closely with law enforcement. And basically every time I've seen this guy interviewed, he's praising these law enforcement agencies left and right. Even the sheriff is a bit more critical of his own agency in terms of wondering if they really had the manpower to take this on. That's why they reached out to another sheriff's agency to help them. And I don't know, it just feels just a little weird. I'm just pointing it out. And once again, we go into some conversations that are a bit like I've heard him talk about on television. He talks about these different phases of the investigation. He's saying that basically their first thoughts were that Deorr could have been taken by an animal, that he could have been kidnapped in some way, possibly even for being sold later, or that a homicide, either accidental or intentional, had occurred here. He then talks about phase 2, where they basically look to the witness statements of the family members. They conduct a bit further investigation. They make an extensive timeline. And then he comes to his conclusions, actually after phase 3. They had no evidence that the child was taken by an animal. I think we can all agree with that. We talked about the shoe situation. He was wearing a camouflage jacket, supposedly. There's a lot of things that could have been left behind if he was taken by an animal. There was no evidence that a forced or unforced kidnapping had occurred. There was evidence that a homicide had occurred by either accident or intentional means. Now that's a pretty bold statement, and they're telling us their outcomes, but they're not really telling us the information that leads to those outcomes. At this point, I'm just wondering, what does this report mean? What's it trying to say? So once again, we get to some more slams towards the parents. During this period, it was discovered that manipulation and outright deception was undertaken by Vernal Kunz, Jessica Mitchell Anderson, and Robert Bob Walton. It was further found that after refusing to speak with KIC investigators, that Isaac Renoir came forward to investigators and gave 4 statements. And it goes into more details about, once again, the failed polygraph tests that I mentioned before. So we're getting back to accusing the parents of doing something here. This is the first time I've actually seen or heard that the grandfather might also be part of this. I heard some things that alluded to, at one point I think Klein was on television and he said the daughter and the grandfather, or the mother and the grandfather, know what happened. But outside of that, I haven't seen any other thing to really support that. And once again, it is mentioned here that they believe that the grandfather, Robert Bob Walton, is included in this cover-up. So the details here on the third bullet point: Robert Bob Walton was deceptive, had told 2 stories to KIC investigators, and was inconclusive on his polygraph examinations. That's not quite a failure, but inconclusive. And he was declared a person of interest or witness in a homicide either by accident or intentional means. It also states pretty openly that the mother and father are actual suspects in a homicide here. Isaac Renwan was truthful, had told the same story to KIC investigators and law enforcement 4 times. However, some details had been left out of one of the stories. After review, Renwan was declared a person of interest as a witness in a homicide either by accident or intentional means. And now we finally get into some new information, a search that occurred in June of 2016. It says that they completed a 5-day targeted search. They had a search dog there known as Chance, well known and well respected from the state of Georgia. Some of the objectives that they were looking to meet were doing a time-distance study to fully verify or disprove Vernal Kunz's timeline, a time-distance study to fully verify or disprove Jessica Mitchell Anderson's timeline, a cell phone impact and signal study of known directional pings, site location study to verify or disprove the testimony by witnesses to KIC and law enforcement. It's a little redundant. Dog search to verify or disprove the testimony to KIC and law enforcement. A secondary dog search in the city of Idaho Falls, Idaho at 2 locations. And here we finally get to the results. The time-distance study failed to verify Vernal Kunz's testimony in his timeline. Pretty bold statement. I would love to know the details behind it, and I figure a report being written in this manner should at least give us the basic of those details. Let's see if we get into it later. The time-distance study failed to verify Jessica Mitchell Anderson's testimony in her timeline. I'm once again very curious what they're trying to state with that one. In the case of the father, we know that he had this whole thing where he was supposedly driving to try to get a stronger cell phone signal. So there is certainly some testing they could do there. It is possible, though I think he only said, I've seen it 2 different ways. He either said he went a half a mile to get a better cell phone signal or a mile and a half. And cell phone towers typically work, from my understanding, on a 3 to 5 mile radius. So the likelihood of him hitting another cell phone tower on that drive, there is some likelihood. The mother having any type of different cell phone tower hit doesn't make a lot of sense, because she is basically static. She was, yards away when she was looking at this fishing spot. She came right back to the campground. As far as I saw, there was no testimony of her leaving the campground at any point through all of that. So I'm really not sure what they're alluding to with this second point. The cell phone impact study was able to determine that Vernal Kunz's testimony was fabricated. As well, it was determined that Vernal Kunz's testimony that he drove 1.5 miles to get a cell signal was not truthful. And here's a big statement. The site location study was successfully completed, and it was determined that the testimony of Kunz, Anderson, and Walton not only could not be verified, but physically, according to their statements to KIC and law enforcement, the events as portrayed could not have occurred. Once again, we are missing some critical details for a statement this big to just be thrown out in a report like this. Is the assumption that we're supposed to take these statements for granted at this point? I do not understand that. The events as they describe them are so simple to understand. How would you disprove that those could have occurred? They weren't paying attention. Grandfather thought the kid walked away with the parents. The kid didn't. The parents thought the kid was back with the grandfather. They were wrong, and the kid disappears. What is there to disprove in that scenario? Even if you consider trying to look for tracks of some kind or shoe prints or things like that, you had hundreds of people all over that area within a day. Or you're not going to be able to do that in June of 2016. So I really don't understand this finding. The dog study presented 5 areas of hits, further explained below. The secondary dog study was productive and is further explained below. So let's see what the 5 hits were. And this is from a cadaver dog. The diaper tree area. This is the area to which it was testified that a diaper was hung in the tree in the campground. Then at area number 2, it is east of a cattle guard. Area number 3 is also due east of the campsite. Area number 4 is 2¼ miles northeast of the 15 MP stake in the ravine near 221 southeast fence. And area number 5, campsite ground that is 3/4 mile due east of the campground. They looked in these areas, and area number 1, no evidence obtained at the diaper tree area. So why is that still listed? Why is it being referred to on this report? I have no idea. Area number 2, excavation was undertaken by LE and KIC. This area needs to be further exhumed and was turned over to law enforcement for further investigation by their team. Why they use the term exhumed there? Typically that's a term that is used specifically when you found a body. I think it's a little tasteless unless he is trying to allude to the fact that they did indeed find some remains there, but I'm pretty sure, knowing this guy, knowing the way this is written, if they found remains there, that would have been clear. Area 3, this area was excavated by hand, and it was found that a previous animal had been buried at this location. During the burial, the subject who did the burial cut his hand and bled into a towel wrapped around the animal. So area 3 is once again not important. Area 4, investigators have turned this area over to law enforcement. There's no details there. I guess it's potential that maybe they found something there. Area 5, investigators believe this may have been a holding site for some type of human body. A few of the areas seem worth more investigation. I'm not sure why the conclusions are not figured out from this part of the investigation yet, and especially with one of those where he's saying the investigators believe this was a holding site for some type of human body. Once again, what's the supporting information there so that the rest of us know that you can realize that you know what you're talking about here? Making these claims, and why isn't law enforcement processing that ground further if that's the case? You said that in the other statements, why aren't you saying it here? It's just, I'm getting a very, very weird feeling about this information that's coming out. So the secondary search sites, it mentions the Clegg residence in Idaho Falls. I just did a quick search, and apparently Trina Clegg is the grandmother of Deorr. Apparently they were able to search her house. They got permission. They are saying that she has not been named a suspect, and they have no evidence to suggest such. They're not clear if she has any info. She testifies she has no info, and her second polygraph is currently pending with the FBI. Now here they did also search the old apartment of Deorr and his family. Here's where we get a little more information into potential financial issues. Both had been evicted for not paying rent and had left the apartment furniture and clothing. In such, the landlord had cleaned out the apartment and moved all the articles near the dumpster for removal, as the property had been declared abandoned by the landlord. Investigators were given permission to search the abandoned waste by the landlord. During the search, we will report investigators found the following: 4 Matchbox cars described previously by the parents as missing, and they did not know where they were. When I was first looking into this, I did see some mention of some type of cars. I don't know. Once again, I wish this had supporting information here. Typically when kids have Matchbox cars, you have a bunch of Matchbox cars. It could be that he had 2 favorites and these were 4 other ones that were part of his stuff. I don't know that these are the same 4 that were being described by the parents when he went missing. It would be really cool if he would have added a footnote here about the parents said a red truck was one of them. We found a red truck. And even that you would have to take with a grain of salt because maybe he has more than one red truck. But once again, this information is just not complete. 2, a camo child's jacket, similar to being described by both parents as being worn on the day of the event and suggested to be missing with the child. This is a bit more interesting. However, is there some possibility that he had more than one camouflage jacket? I think it's possible. Is it reasonable to be suspicious of that piece of information? Yes, I think it's pretty reasonable to be suspicious of that. Once again, we have pictures of Deorr wearing that jacket, so it would have been very easy for the investigator Klein here, to say, the parents say it was this specific jacket that we showed them this picture of. We know that we found that jacket. But once again, we're not getting detail at that fine of a level. A credit card used by a family friend with seemingly purchases of items unknown to investigators in testimony. Now, there's been some roughly worded and strangely worded things in this report, but that one probably takes the cake. You're saying that you found a credit card from a friend of the family with purchases of items unknown to investigators? There's probably a lot of their friends that you don't know the purchases of. And what is important about those purchases? Right here, this point could have been brought to life if he's saying, hey, look, we found a credit card, and it was noted that gasoline and a shovel were bought on this credit card a week before they took this trip. And even then, they're going camping. Maybe they do need gasoline and a shovel. But once again, it's like these sprinkles of information that ultimately don't say a whole lot, but they're being written in here in bullet points like they are extremely important. And maybe they are. I'm just saying, if I was going to present a report of my findings and make such a big deal out of it and get all the press attention that this report did get, I mean, there's numerous articles being written based off this information as it's presented. This information is not very strong as a source from my perspective. An insurance tracking device box and instruction package. What? So what? What does that mean? Are you talking about an insurance tracking device for a vehicle? The kind that I know that some insurance companies want you to put a tracker in your car, and as long as you drive slow enough and safe enough, you get a discount every year or something like that. What would that necessarily have to do with this? Do you think that, are you trying to allude to the fact that they left this piece of a device home because they didn't want it tracking where they were really driving while they were up there because they knew that they were going to go hide a body? I mean, that's a very thin and very weak connection. And of course, he turned all the evidence over to the county sheriff's office for further testing with the DOJ and the FBI. So now we get to the preliminary findings of Phase 4, the search. Investigators have taken 4 weeks to review the finds of this operation. Did I mention this guy's an author? We'll get to that soon. Of this operation, and herein make the following preliminary findings report to the public of Idaho. We believe that the parents, being Vernal Kunz and Jessica Anderson, are deceptive with intent to cover up a crime. That is obviously not new information. We believe that our investigation now starts regarding an intentional homicide. If you thought that they had something to do with a homicide before, now you're saying it's intentional instead of accidental. I'd be very curious to know what shifted the mindset there, but admittedly, he's saying that there is a shift. We now have no evidence other than the testimony of the 4 persons on the site that indicates that Deorr Jr. was on the mountain as testified by these witnesses. Okay, now that is one that we definitely covered in the episode as I reviewed it. How do we know that Deorr was even up there? However, this document seems to say that Isaac is being truthful and his story has not changed. Well, he is extremely clear about the fact that Deorr was indeed there. He was asked that point blank by a reporter from the East Idaho News. So, do you believe that guy's testimony or not? We believe that the parents, through family members and through friends and social media, although a very limited audience, saying that they don't have a lot of friends, that's nice, have begun a misinformation operation on behalf of Deorr Kunz and Jessica Mitchell to impugn the jury pool, mislead the media, mislead law enforcement, and mislead investigators with KIC Texas, as well as the public in general. Tainting the jury pool with social media on this case, I'm just not buying. I'm sorry. There is so much other exposure about this case that is basically naming those 2 as suspects and just about ready to try them and convict them. So even by his own statement, they have a very small social media following. Do you really think that they're going to have the ability to overturn that perception that the mass media is putting out? And even if, what if they're right? Don't they have a right to say, hey, we don't agree with that message that's being put out there, and we're telling you guys we had nothing to do with this? You know, if you fail enough polygraph tests, are you saying that they don't have that right anymore? I know that this is a tough case to look at, but I think that you have to keep pointing back to the evidence to tell the story. And there is a bunch of assumptions in this document and very, very little evidence that we did not already know of before this document came out. We have now, due to the testimony of all witnesses, including store employees, clerks, beer distribution drives, I think he means drivers, fuel handlers, and credible witnesses that have given credible testimony, that we cannot find any person that saw the child go up to the mountain either the day of the event or the evening before. We therefore are now moving our timeline of the event back to 5 p.m. of the day before the 911 call was made. That is a bit of a curious angle, and I'm only kind of stuck on it because I remember the parents being interviewed and the father saying that they had found someone in town that said he saw a little boy that matched Deorr's description, and that the boy was crying and he was there with a man, and both of them appeared to be dirty. And the assumption from the father was that was actually him and his son that were at that store earlier. So I don't know what this means for that person's testimony. Were they lying? Was the father trying to cover up that Deorr was actually being taken away by someone else because he had done some kind of sale or something? I really don't know. And finally, we get to the conclusion of this report. We, the investigators, Team 7, pretty cool name there, Mr. Klein, on this case, want to assure the public that we are working every day on this case. We do not see this case as a cold case as of yet, but that will be determined by law enforcement and not our team. So why are you telling us that? I don't know. We fully believe that this case is solvable. We fully believe in the law enforcement of the country, and we believe in the dedicated men and women of the FBI that are working hard on this case. They are wonderful, dedicated men and women. Then he goes into, once again, just talk about how amazing everyone working on this is. And then is a very interesting point. We further want to urge you all to remember, when you read suggestions, you read information, or you see something somewhere that you think is out of place, it probably is. When people start attacking law enforcement and our team, just smile and know they have nothing other to offer. It is okay, because we are hardworking, dedicated investigators with really thick skin. Investigators that turned this job down twice because the family didn't have money, let me also state, but okay. We could care less what some blogger or Facebook site manager has to say, because they are not privy to the evidence that we all have and continue to discover. However, we equally do not want to discourage it either, as sometimes one of those administrators or writers or fake profile writers says something that nobody knows outside of the investigators. It helps us build our case. What the heck? This dude is putting a troll response in his official report of his findings on this investigation? What? Lastly, we have opened an investigation on 2 Facebook administrators, as they have leaked information regarding the investigation only known to investigators on the case. We have made contact with the administrator, but they will not return our calls. We hope that the person will consider calling us, as one piece of information they may have could break the case open. Hold on a second. The start of that paragraph, he's saying that these 2 administrators leaked information that the investigators knew. By the end of the paragraph, he's saying one of them appears to have information that the investigators don't know. Thank you again for your thoughtful comments and your not so thoughtful comments in the social media sector. We are a country of freedoms, being one of them freedom of speech. However, we encourage you to think before you push enter and post. You may be misled and may need to consider your actions in the end. Philip R. Klein, Senior Investigator, Team Leader of Team 7. Okay, so look. The main issue I have with this document is, one, it has largely no new information. It's largely him reciting his same position that he's already been doing in interview after interview, despite legal threats of defamation of character and all this. Yes, he is convinced the parents had something to do with it. I get it. But to present something as an investigative report, to not include any new facts that could be independently verified, and to continue this constant, I'm sorry, I'm going to say, butt kissing of the law enforcement in this case, I don't get it. I don't understand what the intent of this actually is. But then I went to the Client Investigations website. And maybe the intent is staring at us right in the face. Now, don't get me wrong. This seems to be a legit organization. They have a pretty decent website. I can see, if you look at the About section, he has done a lot of great work. He has a lot of great certifications. I truly believe this is a man that has helped some cases and might be helping in some way with this case. But I also see that he is bending the ear of the public. He uses mass media in a much more effective way than Deorr's parents does. As a matter of fact, do you notice the banner at the top of this website? Client Investigations and Consulting, when you need to know. But what is that stuff over on the right? Oh, books written by Philip R. Klein. What do his books have anything to do with his investigation services? I don't know. Why would you make the banner of your investigating website your published works? I don't know. The other thing I noticed in the About Us section, this dude has a nice paragraph on all of his different appearances on all major media sources. And if you want to read more about his TV and radio appearances, he has a freaking IMDb profile. Yes, an IMDb profile. And outside of that, he's represented by Salient Media, who, as far as I can tell, is only a management company. That's not like a straight up agent. But they are a management and production company that specialize in horror and comedy. And he also has a publicist. So look, someone that could be manipulating public's perception, truly tainting a pool of jurors, this guy has way better tools for doing that than the family of Deorr Kunz. Does that have anything to do about where this young man is? No. And that is one of my big problems with all this. Is this guy really trying to help the public understand this case? Because I got to tell you, from that report, I don't have a much better understanding of that case. Or is he trying to drum up publicity for himself, which admittedly he has been accused of before, not only by me? Is he using that report just as a slam towards people that are hounding him on Facebook? I don't know. The intent of that report is all over the place. It has little information that we can use to really understand this case better. And if you come to the website, it looks like he's plugging his own books. And I just have to say, in doing this work for BrainScratch, I am becoming a bit almost cynical and critical of people that are professional investigators or former law enforcement that are turning into authors. There is a level of integrity that I see that an author does not necessarily need to have, but a former law enforcement person or investigator should. And I think they lose some of that integrity when they start to become an author and they start to focus on selling their books. So is that really what's happening in this case? I can't tell you for sure. I don't see him on TV plugging his books at the end of his speeches about Deorr. I do think it's very cool that his company is donating time to this case without charging the family. Another little weird thing is early on he said that he was being paid for by a family member that wanted to remain anonymous. And that has changed. As of this report coming out, he's saying he's being paid by the public to continue investigating this case. I don't know what the heck that means. There is a link on his website here to a GoFundMe that is basically just an open help us find a lost child, click here to help, and you go to a GoFundMe account that has been open for a year and a half and has raised $22,000. Does he mean that this is helping pay for Deorr's case? I don't know. I think that his story about what is giving him the right to look into this case has changed a little bit as I've heard it. Does that really matter? I think that boils down to the question of, is he really looking to have this case solved, or is he really looking for the attention that he can get out of harping on this case? And this report leaves me with that question square in my lap because I can't tell. So what do you guys think? This is where I'm going to turn it over to you, brain scratchers. And boy, I did not know this video was going to go this long. But check out the report for yourself. I'll have it in the links below. And tell me your thoughts. Is he really trying to share information with the public that's going to help us understand this case better? Is he just blowing the same horn he's been blowing for the past year about the parents being suspects and likely being guilty of homicide in this case? Is there something else going on here that I'm missing? Tell me about it in the comments below. Thank you so much for joining me on this edition of BrainScratch Searchlight. I thank each and every one of you for following this case. I truly do hope that this case gets solved, and I hope that they find Deorr alive and well somewhere. I know that the probability of that might not be very strong. I do think that there is something to be looked at in terms of the parents and what has gone on with their personal lives through all of this and after all of this. But in any case, it's really supposed to be about that little boy, and things like this sometimes pull the attention away from that, even though it's a report about his disappearance. To me, this feels like a little bit of a soapbox to address a bunch of other things that have very little to do with his disappearance. But that's just my opinion. What's yours? Have an excellent day, everyone. I will catch you on the next show on the Geek and Dorks channel.